Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description, in every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic, one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. One mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I'm here to talk about Season 6, Episode 7 of FX's Snowfall, entitled Charnel House. Now, I watched this episode, and I knew the episode title before I even started watching. I'm like, what the fuck is a charnel house? Like, I'm thinking charnel is like, is that a person's name? Like, even in the scene where they're taking Jerome's body into the funeral house, I'm looking at the funeral home like, that's not called charnel. Like, what the fuck is charnel house? The episode ends, and I'm still like, what the fuck? What is charnel house? Where did this come from? So I thought maybe it's like a phrase or a term that I'm just not aware of. So I Googled it, and of course, it is a term or phrase that I'm just not aware of. And when I read you what it is, you can understand why this episode has that name. And in general, it's kind of almost like the theme for this season, it feels like. But charnel house is a building or vault in which corpses or bones are piled, a place associated with violent death. I think we can piece together why I was given that title. But interesting thing of note, when I was reading about charnel houses, it was apparently a thing where like sometimes like a gravekeeper would like run out of space in the graves, or would like have too many bodies to bury all at one time. So they would like put them in this charnel house and just have the bodies chilling there until they could bury them. I'm like, that's a kind of a crazy thing. But the part that says a place associated with violent death, I think that's kind of what we're going for here. And to not be even as literal as like a location as say like Kane's, like I think the literal interpretation of that would be Kane's warehouse from last week, right? But then wouldn't you then name last week's episode Charnel House instead of, what was it, Concrete Jungle? I think in this sense, the place is a little bit more metaphorical, or even a little bit just more all-encompassing. Like it'd just be LA or South Central, whatever. But then I don't know, I kind of feel like the place per se can be anywhere that these characters are at. Like anywhere Franklin goes, violence is gonna follow. So wherever place he has been in all season, violence is taking place there. Think of Kane's place, the warehouse, Kane's house, like when he was in there and the drive-by happened. So yeah, interesting choice for a title, I'll say. But talking about this episode, it's a bit of a I don't want to say a come down because that makes it sound like a negative. I think it's an opportunity to take a breather after last week, after what happened with Jerome. We all needed that, right? This episode mostly deals with the fallout surrounding Jerome's death, but it also kind of, I think, very clearly lays out the direction for the final 3 episodes, like who's going to be pitted against who, and it tightens the relationships. And what I mean by that is like, we have very much narrowed down the Teddy Franklin situation, like that Teddy Franklin Gustavo situation. That's very much, I think we can kind of see what direction that's going, even though we might not know how it's ultimately going to play out. Same thing with Louis. I feel like a lot of these storylines have been condensed a little bit, and we have a much more focused idea of where things are going to be going in these final 3 episodes. But continuing on with this one, this episode opens immediately following the shootout in Kane's warehouse with Jerome's body being taken to the funeral home. And one thing I loved about this, not just this scene, but this kind of like sequence of scenes that open the episode, is that it shows you something you rarely see, which is the aftermath of events like this and what happens after the immediate aftermath. Not like, this happens and then we jump forward to a funeral, or this happens and we jump forward to people talking about, like, the immediate aftermath. Like, most shows would have skipped the part where we take Jerome's body to that funeral home and Franklin pays the guy to be discreet. The scene where Leon takes Louis home. But, I like those scenes because it made the Jerome death feel more real, because you're seeing people reacted to it in the moments and hours afterward. And that just made it feel like, okay, this is how people in these situations have to deal with this right after it happens. Not the part, like I said, the part that they skip over in most movies, we see it here. And yeah, eventually Louis is gonna have to go home after a night like that, right? Like, anybody's gonna have to go home eventually, whether it's you spending a whole bunch of time in the hospital, whether it's been 24 hours in a hospital, whatever the case may be, at some point, you're gonna have to go home. And what does that look like? What does it look like when she sees herself in the mirror for the first time after getting beaten like that, having the branding of the K on her? What's it like walking around this big ass house for the first time with knowing that Jerome is not going to be there anymore, knowing that maybe the last conversation you guys had there didn't go so great. Like all of that stuff, I appreciated them showing me that, because like I said, it felt like it made Jerome's death more real, and that they were really celebrating, I think, this character and giving him a send-off that is just, I don't think they can match this. Like, they don't even have enough time. Like, they've dedicated like most of this episode to kind of like Jerome's memory to a degree. So it's I don't think they could do this with anyone else, but I like the fact that they're giving Jerome's character this amount of time, and then they're using this kind of like as the impetus to like spur the events of the final 3 episodes. So let's kind of move on to talking about Louis. Move on to continuing to talk about Louis. I think Louis has a great episode with a lot of interesting moments for her character in this one. So after all the going home afterwards and all that, she's later visited by Sissy. Sissy's like, okay, this has to stop, right? And Louis says this is all Franklin's fault, and that the difference between her and Sissy is that Sissy still has stuff she cares about. And I'm like, wow, okay, that feels really ominous. Like, and I think the underlying message of "I'ma kill your son" is present throughout this entire episode. And I'm not saying that Louis is successfully gonna kill Franklin at the end of this show. But what I'm saying is, like, Louis' desire for Franklin to be dead, I think, is known by both her and Sissy and unspoken, and it persists throughout the episode. It's the same as the moment that they share at Jerome's funeral, and it's like, you see the hand holding, but then you see, like, it's almost like this head nod that's acknowledging, like, we're gonna share this sadness right now, but you come after my boy and I'm gonna fuck you up. Like, that's kind of like, it's a truce for now, but I'm gonna fuck you, like, keep it cute. I'm gonna fuck you up. That's the kind of nod that Sissy gave at the funeral, and that's the energy that I felt between the two of them throughout this entire episode. But after Louis is tormented by nightmares about Jerome, she ends up going to Scully's, and she pulls up with very, very much a "I don't give a fuck if I live or die" attitude. But her and Scully then have a great scene where they talk about how he dealt with loss after the loss of his girl and his daughter. And I thought that was a really powerful scene for Scully's character. Way better than that weird scene that I complained about at the beginning, where it was like, okay, now Scully's all this weird, hokey kind of hippie guy. I like how they've kind of toned that down a little bit. Not completely, but I don't know. I thought this scene was an interesting take on handling death and coping with it. And I like the idea of her getting that from Scully. Like, it's kind of like a full circle thing, from where they've come to where they are right now to where they're sharing in this experience. I thought that was a really great scene for Scully. Louis then meets with Teddy, and they inform each other how Franklin has fucked them both, which is Franklin killed Teddy's father, and like I said, Louis holds Franklin responsible for Jerome's death. And Teddy wants Franklin, and Louis says, like, after the funeral, it's all good. Like, I'll do whatever you need. She said, I'll cut him from nipples to balls. I don't know. It was some weird phrase. I don't know. I'm sure nipples to balls is not a phrase, but she says something to that effect. The episode ends with Jerome's funeral, which is, again, a beautiful and flawless homage to this character. Like, what a beautiful sequence this was. Everybody's there. Big D, Franklin, Scully, Leon, Gustavo, Sissy, Buckley, who shouldn't be there since he was smoking crack when Jerome needed him. But what I liked about this scene is, like, in reality, when you have these gang funerals, yeah, sometimes they get shot up because, I mean, that's just what happens. But by and large, I liked how this funeral showcased how we, black people, can put our shit to the side for a day and pay respects to a respected member of the community. Like, the fact that everything was squashed in that moment and everybody acknowledged, like, it's still beef, but out of love for Jerome and out of love for what we once had, the beef is on pause right now. And we saw it with Louie and Sissy, I think. It was a little bit more buried there, but then we have it with the nice scene with Dion where he asked if they got the person that killed Jerome, and he's like, yeah, and he's like, good, or I can't remember what he said, but it was about as heartwarming as a moment as you could have between two gangsters. Like, with virtually no words spoken, it was very much a showing of love. And I love the extra somber rendition of the I Don't Want to Know, the Mario Winans song. I love the really somber rendition of that. I thought it was fitting, and it felt nice for that moment, for that scene. And then Franklin closes the episode at the funeral asking Louie for the help that she promised him when she thought she was gonna die. He's acting like it's a fucking contract. He's like, remember how you said you was gonna help me? You mean when I was getting raped and burned? Like, yeah, that time. And she's like, you know you're the devil, right? And he says, yeah, but I love how he delivered it. It wasn't just that he delivered it through tears. It was a way of, like, it was almost like him coming to grips with that reality in that moment, but also being sad about how he doesn't regret it. Like, it was an acceptance of it. Like, yeah, I know I'm the devil and that sucks, but it is what it is. Like, that's kind of what he came, and I think the tears were remorse over it being, it is what it is. Like, he don't want to be that, but it's like, it is what it is. So, like, I really like how Franklin delivered that simple line. Speaking of Franklin, Franklin asked Leon for $500,000, presumably to hand over to Gustavo, since it's the price of freedom. And he then says, Jerome was his blood and he loved him, but he should have never broke away from us. And that stopped Leon in his tracks. And I think this is a good time to point out that while Franklin is centrally focused on Teddy, he's not realizing how he's losing all the people around him. Like, Jerome's dead, Louie hates him, and now Leon is probably questioning, like, his integrity, like how good of a person he is. And you already know the regrets that Leon has about even being here in the first place, let alone all the activity that's been happening in the projects. And then to lose Jerome and have Franklin say something like that, like, you could tell, like, Leon is kind of like that was the first moment where Leon's kind of like, I don't know about this guy anymore. And then Franklin also later has a nightmare like Louie did, and he wakes up and appears to be having what we in 2023 would probably think is a panic attack. But, he says something seriously wrong with him. Veronique is like, no, you're okay, but she makes a very worried face. But I just kind of took that as like, no, I'm assuming he is just having a panic attack and it's not something serious. Veronique's face read as like, I'm going to say it's not serious, but I'm very, very fucking concerned. But it looked to me like a panic attack. And I'm like, okay, well, it makes sense they'd be concerned because panic attacks weren't a well-known thing in the 80s like they are right now. So it makes sense that they will be like, oh, I don't know what this is, and be really worried when it's really just a panic attack. And maybe if you just stop killing motherfuckers every 5 minutes, maybe you stop having panic attacks. But, you got Teddy coming after you and all this other shit. So panic attacks are going to happen, buddy. Speaking of Teddy, his ex shows up pregnant and tells him to give Franklin back the money. And I like what Teddy says. He thinks I stole his money. Already I'm laughing. What you mean he thinks you stole his money? And then she's like, did you? And then he said, I gotta read it because I put the quote here. I seized ill-gotten gains on behalf of the United States government. Man, if you don't stop playing stupid out here, you know you stole this man's money. like the delusion. And then she says maybe this is something that I missed. I was very, very, very sick. And I still, to a degree, am. And I am mustering up the energy to do this video right now. And then I'm going to go collapse as soon as I'm done. I was very, very sick when I was watching this. But she says for him to fix it or she will. He says, what are you going to do or how? And she's like, a public execution. The fuck? Of who? Like, what? Huh? Like, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Again, maybe I missed something. I don't know. But that was a weird response. And I'm wondering, like, does she mean a public execution of Franklin? A public execution of him? I'm assuming Franklin, but I don't know. Gustavo is visited by Ruben in his sister's house, and he says he now wants the next cocaine shipment in the warehouse. It's coming in 2 days. He wants it there. He wants Teddy there so they can do the bust, and then Gustavo can be free. And the sister's like, we should probably leave, and you probably shouldn't know where we're going. And Gustavo's like, yeah. So you know shit is real in his eyes when he readily agrees to that with no argument. Like, yeah, you should probably go ahead. He then tells Franklin everything, because what choice does he have at this point? And it sounds like they might be using Franklin as a trap to catch Teddy, but gotta make Teddy think it was Teddy's idea, which I almost thought was the funeral. Like, I'm like, is he gonna expect... Because, like, when Louis tells Teddy that the funeral is the next day in their meeting, it made me wonder, like, did maybe Franklin convince Louis to tell Teddy about the funeral so that Teddy would show up at the funeral so they could get him? But then I'm like, why would Louis authorize something like that to happen at Jerome's funeral? So I'm like, no, but interesting concept anyway, the idea of how are they going to convince Teddy that he's caught Franklin when in reality he's walking into a trap. I don't know, but I'm very intrigued to see. So that's all I really have for this episode. Like I said, I thought it was not a great episode. It was a really, really good episode. And like I said, it was the breather that we needed after episode 6. And I think we should probably be buckling in for a final 3 episodes. They're going to be pretty crazy. But I do want to close with a couple of thoughts real quick. In our terrible Parissa moment of the week, I love how she walked around Teddy's crib, like pointing out all the flaws. And then he's like, it's a rental. And she's like, oh, so you don't even have a house? Like, why does he put up with this motherfucker, man? And then later, she talks about, like, she basically builds herself up and talks about how great she is, doing this whole monologue about how Teddy needs to keep her excited or she's going to find excitement elsewhere, basically saying she's a blessing to him, really a blessing him with the opportunity to be with her. And she says something like, I've given you the keys to my heart, use it. Like, why does he put up with this troll? Like, I can't stand this woman. Like, she makes herself sound so valuable and has provided nothing of value whatsoever, has only caused trouble and been obnoxious, insulting, doesn't answer questions straight, like nothing appealing about this woman whatsoever other than the fact that she's moderately good looking and not anywhere near good looking enough to have this personality. I don't know why Teddy puts up with her. And then lastly, the foreshadowing for Leon, I think, continues to be a little ominous. In this episode, Wanda's begging him to leave the projects. She leaves on her own. She ends up getting an apartment from Sissy. She ends up, we don't see it, but she's offered... Sissy offers her the option of taking over the shelter full time, Alton's shelter, in place of her. So everything's really shaping up quite well for Wanda. And she's like, Leon, you need to get out of here. We need to go. And Leon's like, let me just straighten out this one last thing so that the next person can run it. And I'm like, that's always the sign of the last ride for somebody, though. When they say, I just got to do this one last thing. Yeah, I don't know. The writing's on the wall for Leon. It's not looking good, unfortunately. But that's all I got for this week. I'm going to go fall onto the couch and pass out, and I will see you guys next week for episode 8. And until then, peace.